Well, fellas, we have a different show or a different program for today. Normally, we're doing this live. Scott and I, who today is behind the camera, are discussing different Bible topics and passages. But this is the Bible Quest Tuesday edition, every Tuesday at 2. But we're actually going to do a recording instead of a live edition, so we get to talk with Patrick and Nathan. And just for our audience's sake, Nathan, where are you from?
I currently live in Elmira, New York, upstate New York, just on the border of Pennsylvania and New York. And I've been there for about 4 years. Really enjoy the part of the country.
Now you're not there. That's not where you're from originally.
No.
You mentioned Chicago the other night.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, from just south of Chicago. That's where my family still lives, about 50 miles south there.
Okay, so you're a Midwest guy.
I'm a Midwest guy.
Trying to make it in the north. And I'm a Southeast guy. I'm from Alabama. Mm-hmm. So being in Philadelphia, just, you adapt. We'll talk maybe about that today. And Patrick, where you live now, where are you from?
Now I live outside of Rochester, New York, and I'm originally from Kansas City.
Okay. So,
yeah, Midwestern kid. Okay. Moved to the Northeast about 16 years ago.
Nice. Well, Scott brought us here this morning to talk about some specific issues with the church and evangelism. Scott, you want to take it away?
And by the way, let's mention where here is.
That's right.
This is Lake Ontario, and Toronto is right over there in the distance.
That's probably the point of interest for everyone watching this, is where in the world
where are they?
Every year, some families get together in the Northeast to have a camp out and take an opportunity to talk with some of these guys who are usually here.
All right, question number one. I want to ask a question about personal evangelism, get some input from each of you. And of course, obviously, one of the things about personal evangelism is there's not one single way to go, one single place to start. There's one single central person we are preaching to people.
Right.
But in getting studies, starting studies, different things, I want some input from you guys on what you have found helpful or interesting that might encourage people to try some different things. So personal evangelism, what are some biblical principles that are helpful to remember, and what are just some practical things that you found? Who wants to start?
I'd be glad to. So one of the goals that I've tried to emulate from the book of Acts, the disciples are accused of filling up the communities, the cities with the teaching of the gospel. And I want the gospel, the word, to be taught in the communities that I live in and the communities surrounding us. And with a lot of help from the brethren in Elmira, we've set up numerous small studies in different localities, and we've announced them on avenues like Facebook and Meetup. And we meet there every week to read a book of the Bible. And there's a community not far from Elmira where there's been 4 locals who attend nearly every week, and they have for some time. There's a couple other little classes in different places. Haven't been quite as successful, but the way I look at it is we're doing our job if we're filling our community with the teaching of the word.
Excellent.
One other kind of funny thing, I've always kind of set the radius of my advertising to about 12, 15 miles, thinking, how far will people drive for this? A few weeks ago, I accidentally had that set at about 30 miles instead of 15. And so it caught in Ithaca, New York, and got 3 or 4 people from Ithaca who were interested. And one lady was like, "Can you come start a study in Ithaca?"
Wow. Oh, excellent.
And I talked to her on the phone. We texted back and forth. Now, interestingly, she hasn't come, but there's been another young man who's been at both the classes that we've done so far. And so perhaps her enthusiasm has put us into some personal contact with some other people. I don't know where it will go.
Yeah.
But it was accidental from my standpoint, and now we're driving to Ithaca.
Might not have been accidental from a providential standpoint. All right, super. Sounds good. Next.
So I find one of the things I do a lot in personal evangelism is I'm always driving conversations to spiritual questions when I'm meeting people or with friends, and obviously getting out in the community, just being in contact with people. So I kind of play a game with myself, and unbeknownst to others, how fast can we get to Jesus is a conversation starter. But it's usually just listening to them and finding out where they're at in the development of spiritual questions. And it doesn't take too long usually to figure out, is this person spiritually minded at all? And where are they at? And then I start asking them, exploring. I use Jesus as a pattern for that, meeting them where they are and using questions to open them up. And then from there, at some point, that relationship develops to the point where there's some trust there, and I ask for the Bible study, and because I really want to be sitting down at their, dining room table or in their living room and having that one-on-one conversation, because they're going to have to do some pretty heavy thinking, and I want them to be in a place where they're comfortable and prepared to do that.
Yeah, the thing about questions is so, I think, important. I went through a little while back, and by my count, I counted up Jesus asking 174 questions in the Gospels. Yeah. And it's not because Jesus didn't know anything, but questions are an effective way to teach.
Yeah.
And then when we listen to people, we find out where they're at and helps us know where to start. Like that a lot. Justin.
Yeah, my turn. Like these guys, I'm interested in trying to get out in the public sphere as much as possible. And one thing that I do at least once a week is I go out. I'm in public all the time studying, but one thing I do is I try to once a week go out studying and not expecting to get a lot done. Personally, because I'm trying to interact with people that are there in the coffee shop or in the library or in the community, and I'll get stuff done depending on who's there. But as far as just interactions, I want to interrupt my studies. Yeah. And sometimes I'm trying to get my work done, and someone comes along and talks to me, and there's this tension between, I got to get this done, I'm on a deadline, they want to have this conversation. But if I schedule the interruption, I say, no, I'm looking for the conversations. Yeah. And there was, recently I was having one of those kinds of studies at a Starbucks. There was nowhere to sit, and so I sat at the end of the bar where everyone's getting their drinks. And so I was talking with everybody coming through there, just about. And one lady, she came up, and I made some comment about what I thought was a cross around her neck. It wasn't. But anyway, she was interested in my Bible, and she'd only been studying the Bible with people on TikTok. That was her only access to Bible study. Wow. And I said, well, do you have a minute? We could sit down and discuss some things. So we spent an hour talking about the Bible story. We started a study weekly. And then 3 weeks later, some other lady saw us studying, and so she joined in. And those things, like you said, are providential. I can't control who shows up that day. But the other thing that I've gotten more comfortable doing, it used to be that when I started off preaching full time, if I didn't have some kind of study with an unbeliever, I really felt like I wasn't doing my job as an evangelist. Mm-hmm. But I noticed in Ephesians 4 that our job really is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And so if I have studies going on with believers, with members of the church I'm part of, I see that as a bonus, because then they feel more comfortable, more confident going out and talking to their friends and their coworkers about the gospel. And so, like you said, you're trying to direct conversations to spiritual things. I'm trying to help other people learn how to direct those conversations. And where do you start? And how do you take apart a passage and see what's going on inside it? And so I've got several studies going on right now during the week, just with other Christians, to keep them encouraged and help them to feel better about studying with other people.
Yeah. First and second missionary journeys, Paul's primarily bringing people to Christ. Third missionary journey, he's especially working with people who are already Christians. It's all part of the work. All right, question
Scott,
number. Go ahead, Nate.
Before we do that, one other thing, Justin, and we've already mentioned providence in this a few times. When it comes to personal evangelism, I think a lot of times, well, what's the key? What do we need to be doing? And we do want to see results. I want to see results. I want people to learn about Jesus. I want to see people added to the kingdom by the Lord. But I think we just have to be doing things. And there will be some things that will work and we'll keep doing them. There'll be things that maybe we think, well, that's not really all that fruitful. But I am convinced that God knows when we want to work and when we want to do his will, and just show that we're putting our feet to the ground. We're putting our hands to the work, and God will see that. and God will send those who are seeking to us. I'm confident in that.
Very good.
I just think prayer is part of that too. I mean, if it's God's work, I think sometimes I fall into, I've got to, and I've got my plans, instead of asking God to bless and to lead. And I'm not getting an answer from Him directly, but I want to make sure I'm keeping it separate with Him.
Question number 2. I saw a thing the other day. It said, if Paul was here today, the church would be getting a letter. So,
Oh yeah, that's right.
so
He did that.
imagining Paul's letter to the Americans. Okay, so if Paul was writing to stereotypical, and I'm not talking here about all the broad things that call themselves churches and they have a rainbow flag and stuff, but people that are dedicated to following the New Testament, but we're all affected by our culture, right? Like, for instance, Corinthians. 1 Corinthians is written to the church at Corinth. And when you study the culture of Corinth, you find out that there's a whole lot of culture in Corinth that shouldn't be in the church, but it is. And, I can read 1 Corinthians and think, why on earth, what were they thinking? Well, they were thinking like Corinthians. So if Paul was writing to churches here in America, what might he be saying? Who wants to start?
I think he might quote Jesus: "Render unto God what is God's, and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." We've got a bit of a problem where we blur the lines a bit culturally, and on top of that, many churches have lost their first love. That they don't love to do the mission. They don't want to do evangelism anymore. They're comfortable growing the church through the womb and not through the feet.
Yeah.
And that's sad. That's a sad thing. Congregations who haven't converted anybody by their efforts in a couple of decades or more.
Wow.
And so we don't have a lot of that Northeast because we'd be dying. But
yeah.
But if it can happen anywhere. I think it's a real problem that we need to address.
I heard about a church one time. It was about 40 people. They said, we don't want to grow because if we grow, we're afraid we might split. So that's too sad.
There it is.
All right. Who's next?
Well, when I think about what is the biggest problem of the church, I have to say pride. I feel it's a little bit of a cop-out because that was also the problem in Genesis 3, right? Pride is
and with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
The universal problem.
But I think that is a symptom of our culture.
Yes.
We are independent. No one tells us what to do. Who are you to judge me? And the list can kind of go on and on. But you just think about how pride poisons everything you do. In 1 Corinthians 8, Paul says, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. Just think about how important knowledge is. We have to have knowledge, but even knowledge is sort of stained when pride is there. You think about the Pharisees, you mentioned fasting and praying. Well, is that a bad thing? Well, no, that's a good thing, but even fasting and prayer are ugly when they come along with pride. And you see pride in how we view ourselves towards God. Again, I don't need authority. I don't really need forgiveness. I'm doing kind of fine myself. I have all that I need. Or you see pride in how it manifests itself towards other people. Maybe we gear towards those who are prosperous and educated. Those are the type of people we want in our group. Those are the type of people who are going to feel comfortable in our groups. All of those are symptoms of pride. And again, chances are, if there's a problem in our church or a problem in our life, it's connected to pride.
So often. Very good.
And we don't see it. Sorry.
Yeah.
We don't see ourselves as having that problem. But as Americans, we probably do.
Yeah.
As humans, we probably do.
Yeah. Justin.
Yeah, that's a really good. I've thought about that question a lot. Studying Revelation and the the letter that Jesus sends to the 7 churches, or Paul's writings. I preached through Jude a few weeks ago, where Jude said, I wanted to write to you about this fellowship that we have, this common salvation, but instead I need to write to you about this common faith. You need to stand up for it, and you fight for it. Sometimes the things that we want to hear aren't what we need to hear. I really don't know. I don't know what Jesus might say, or Paul would say to the church today. But I did think of this when he said to one of the churches, maybe one of you guys remembers which one, he said, hold fast to what you have. I don't know which one that was.
Smyrna?
Was it Smyrna? That makes sense. Maybe. One of our viewers can look it up and tell us in the comments. It's in Revelation 2 through 3. But I think about how eager we are to try to find something new, and some new way of doing things, or some new way of looking at the teaching, or keeping things fresh. And I was having a conversation with some brethren the other day just about how necessary it is to go back to what's old.
Yes.
And to hold fast to what Jesus gave us. And so maybe the letter, this is going to be worse cop out than yours, Nathan, is the Bible. I mean, I think we try to, okay, what's the thing? What's the thing? And really we just need to be regularly listening to Jesus and all that he left us through the Spirit. And we have so much we've been given, we just don't treasure it so much.
And so often over time, you'll hear there's some book that somebody wrote.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden everybody's excited about, oh, you got to get this book. You got to read this book. Oh, and then you see people swayed by the thinking that, and of course there'll be some biblical verses in any book.
Right.
But there's also the agenda of the author, and everybody's, or a number of people get all in on that book.
Yeah.
If it's not the Bible, then you're in the wrong book.
I hear a lot of people who are excited to have Bible studies and Bible discussions, and then I find out what they're studying. They're actually reading these books.
Yes.
And those aren't bad necessarily. You know, I've found I've got books. People are often impressed, like, you got a lot of books, and do you read all these? And, well, Lindsay does. She tells me what's in them, so I can know which ones to read. But I enjoy reading. But I'm not going to be able to recognize the voice of Jesus in them if I don't actually know what he said. And so if there's something valuable in those books, it's going to be what Jesus has already said in his word. And I think we're too eager for a shortcut, or for something that is more, I don't know, just new is maybe not the right word.
Which ties into the pride.
It does.
There's
so.
This new scholar, this new guy. And brethren have been so dumb, and now
the way I was raised, the way I was
enlightened.
Taught, that's tradition. I want to get away from tradition, and we need to be getting away from tradition. But tradition that's given by God is a good thing.
Yeah,
and we need to hold to those things.
It's like the tradition of the apostles.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we need to cling to those things and hold fast to what's true, and know that Jesus gave those things to us because he loves us, and he wants to come again and find us ready.
Yeah, so one more verse on that, and then we'll go to question 3. John 10, Jesus said, my sheep don't listen to the voice of a stranger. Mm-hmm. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. Question number 3. You guys are all raising kids. So a biblical principle, and maybe a practical tip or warning or suggesting, if you could share one tip with other parents. What are some biblical principles that are really important, and how have you found? What's a practical way that you found of implementing some of those?
I'll go first with that one, because you said raising kids, and I say that all the time. And I'll let you guys. How many kids do you have? You're raising children. I think though we need to remember we're raising adults, and so much of the Proverbs is geared for here's what wisdom looks like. But there's folly in the heart of a child right now. And so right now I have a almost 15-year-old son, and he's right at that age where he wants so much to be an adult, but every now and then the little kid comes out and he fumbles it, and I don't want to squash that. He's a young man, and I'm excited about that, but I want to remember that we're training our children to be adults. And sometimes we expect too much of them. We forget that they're kids. And sometimes we don't expect enough of them. We forget. We almost want to keep them as kids forever. And I like looking back through old photos, old videos. Oh, do you remember this? And you remember that was so sweet and so fun. But there's another stage they're moving to, and I want to get our children ready to go out on their own and serve Jesus on their own and find spouses if that's God's will, or serve God as single people. I'm excited about that, and I want them to get a picture of that. The other day, Elijah, who just got a job, he can bike to it. And so he's biking on his way to work, and he told me this afterward. He said he noticed someone reading on their porch. He thought, I'm going to talk to her when I come back if she's still there. I'm on my way to work. So on his way back home, she was still there. And he stopped and said, excuse me, were you reading a Bible? And she said, no. He said, well, do you? Do you read your Bible? She said, yes. Would you like to read with me sometime? Is what Elijah said. And so here's Elijah, and he's already, being spiritually minded as a child. And that shouldn't surprise us, because we're trying to get them to do that as adults.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to expect great things of our kids, because God has plans for them and wants to use them in his kingdom. And I think we expect too little of them sometimes.
Very good. And let me mention somewhat what that can lead to. Some years ago, a young lady, there was a Christian, and she had friends, other girls that were Christians. She wasn't married yet, but a number of her friends were. And she said, none of my friends that are married right now are in a happy marriage. And one of the problems tended to be, apparently, that a number of women had married guys that they thought were men, and then they found out they were boys.
Yeah.
All right. Who's next?
So I'm the one who's behind on these guys. My oldest is 10. And, sort of like the evangelism question, I don't know if I have any magic arrow to shoot or golden bullet. One of the things that my father-in-law, David Bunting, has shared with his sons and sons-in-law is that children need to hear their father reading the Word of God out loud. Mm-hmm. And so we have formed a pretty regular routine of reading a chapter a day. And we read through the chapter, and we kind of title the chapter together. And we write it down, we take notes. And we're into Judges now. So we started Genesis 1, and we've been going for some time now. My goal is to read the whole Bible with my children before they leave the house. And you're able to do that. And so again, I don't know if I have any sort of great piece of advice, but I know that this has been a fun thing, an enjoyable thing for me and my children, and I hope my children hear every word that God has revealed to us spoken by their daddy.
Oh, wow. Cool. That's cool.
I like the way you frame that. It's an enjoyable thing. Mm-hmm. That it's not like, all right, we got to get our Bibles out and make sure we get our Bible reading in, but this is family time. And when you pitch it that way and you treat it that way, it's one of my favorite times of the day, because we sit down and everything else is set aside. I like the idea of titling a chapter together. I've not done that. That's cool.
Yeah, I do kind of sometimes assert daddy control over some of those chapters. I'm like, well, let's go this direction. And young. Sometimes Christy will overhear. She maybe that was actually a pretty good one. All right.
We're learning as much as they are. We're learning how to parent. It's fun.
Well, my advice would be to remember that your children are also your neighbor, and your objective is to make disciples of the nations, and it begins in your home. And which I really love what you're doing with your reading with your children. My children are 23, 21, going to be 20, 18, and 10. So my youngest is his oldest's age, and I have 4 adults who live with me who are my children. And they're good disciple makers, and that's a good thing. So remember that, and then be humble with your kids. When you make mistakes, do what you should do with any brother or sister in the
That
faith.
is huge.
Say you're sorry, say you repent, and ask for forgiveness if they're not forthright with it, because sometimes they won't be. And that humility of I've had to tell my oldest child, I'm sorry a few times for being sorry, you were the first one in the gate, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. But as a result of that, it was very close.
I think that is absolutely huge. I remember a brother in church who was really active, really involved, but like one of his best friends made the observation, I've never heard him admit he was wrong about anything. And if we raise our kids thinking that if we apologize and admit we were wrong, it will interfere with our authority, we've got it exactly upside down.
Amen.
Because our kids will not go away from our house thinking we always handled it right. Thinking that they see when we blow it.
Yeah. They know
And
we
if,
didn't.
yeah, and when they see, well, in Genesis, what do when they sin? They try to hide it. They try to blame it on somebody else. And if that's what we model for them, we shouldn't be surprised when they keep modeling the same thing. But if they see us show how this is what a man does when he's wrong, he admits it, which comes back to the pride issue as well. And I do a series on parenting, and a point I added to it after watching a couple of individuals, I knew them from little to older, both from, very conservative families, exceptionally conservative in some ways, and then the boys ended up just being disasters. And what it was, coming back to pride, they had never trained humility. And if we're teaching our kids to be proud of, you did the best in Bible class, you did the best memory verse, when you led a song, it was a huge mistake. Huge mistake. Guys, thank you very much. And for the audience, we discussed how this format might work, and I'm sure the camera has moved around some, so just bear with that. But here we are at Lake Ontario, and Justin, close us out, and then I'll hand the phone to you so you can turn it off. Because I don't want to hit the wrong button.
Man, thanks for joining in. Scott, thanks for the thoughtful questions. And if you did find this discussion helpful, hope you'll share with other people. And if God's willing, we'll see you all next week.
And I'll turn that up.